Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, they're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, joining you today from my new apartment in Pullman, Washington. Just started the spring semester at Washington State University, doing business economics, but enough about that. Let's get right into the movie. So today we continue our snow but not Christmas themed month with one of my all-time favorite films, just in general, not favorite snow films, not favorite horror films, just favorite films. Stanley Kubrick's 1980 adaptation of Stephen King's novel The Shining. Ah, just an amazing movie. Just love it so much. Can't wait to talk about it. I just love everything about it. As you could tell from the podcast logo, which uses the carpet as the background, just a great movie. Love it so much. Big fan of it. So let's, without further ado, get right into it. So we open on this overhead helicopter shot of a car going down a mountain road. It's supposed to be going up the Rockies to the Overlook Hotel, which is supposed to be, like I said, in the Rockies in Colorado. It's actually shot in Glacier National Park, which as soon as I found that out, I'm like, well, now I got to get over there and check it out. Because that's a lot closer to me than the Rockies aren't that far, but when it's supposed to be in Colorado, not, the Wyoming part of the Rockies. But not only are we getting this amazingly shot sequence, just of beautiful mountains and a lone car on the highway, we're getting the score, the amazing, perfect score. I love it so much, and I can't like put my finger on like what I love so much about it. Just that it's just so perfectly ominous and tone setting. But the score by Wendy Carlos and Rachel Elkind, I think. Yeah, that's what. But oh, man, just love that score so much, and it's very well used in Westworld season 3, and I forget the context of it and everything, but immediately recognizable. But it just like it's such a good like tone setting music piece that it got used appropriately in that, and then it worked just as well as it does in this movie. But like I said, going through the Rockies, we get the opening credits in just like a very simple, straightforward font. Like I'm not a font guy, so I don't know exactly which font, but it's these just simple baby blue letters, and we finally get our first look at the Overlook Hotel. And for this establishing shot, they used the Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood, Oregon, but it's really only for this initial establishing shot and for reference. And then they built an exterior replica at I think Elstree Studios in England. And then obviously all the indoor stuff as well was shot there. And it should be noted that there are inconsistencies with that establishing shot and various shots of the exterior throughout the film. Like the layout of the hotel changes and all that stuff. And depending on who you ask, if you ask most of the people in the documentary Room 237, everything's on purpose and everything's a code for something and everything represents something, or basically any inconsistencies or continuity errors are on purpose and mean that Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing. So that I just saved you 2 hours. You don't have to watch that documentary now. I mean, there's some good information in there, but a lot of it's a little bit like, okay, like settle down. But yeah, a little tweaks here and there, and some of it could be on purpose. I think it is maybe supposed. I think the best theory I've heard was that it's just supposed to be like make you feel a little disoriented. That the inconsistency like subconsciously makes you feel disoriented. And if that's the case, then like I applaud that. That's genius right there. No matter what, like the reasoning, if it was on purpose, on accident, Stanley Kubrick is still a creative genius. No matter what, no matter how mean he is or any of that stuff, he's a genius. It shows. We get a short little title card. We get a few of these throughout, just kind of establish like what's going on. This one says the interview, and we see Mr. Ullman is there to meet with Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, and is waiting for him in the lobby. No. Jack has arrived in the lobby, asks at the front desk, and like, oh, Mr. Ullman's in his office, and then it's just, first door on the left. And here's one of those notable inconsistencies with the layout, is that you could see as he's going to the office that there's obviously some sort of hallway that would go behind the office. But when he gets to the office, there's a window to the outside. So it's one of those just like weird things that honestly I probably wouldn't have really noticed until my 20th viewing, but now that it's been pointed out, it's obvious, So we cut from the interview over to Wendy and Danny Torrance, Jack's wife and son. They're at their apartment in Boulder, Colorado, and they're just watching TV. Danny asks his mom about the hotel, if he's excited or if she's like, happy to be going there and stuff like that. And she's like, oh yeah, like I think it'll be exciting. Like what do you think? And I forget what his exact answer is, but basically establishes that he's like nervous about it and that Tony is nervous about it. Tony, we learn, is Danny's imaginary friend. And like Danny does like the voice, he does like a little finger thing, like Tony, I can't do the voice right now because I'm sick. COVID, of course. Like I said, just that we know that Tony doesn't want to go, but he's not saying why. Cut back to Jack. He's kind of giving some information about himself. We learned that he used to be a teacher and that now he's a writer, that basically teaching was a way to make ends meet, but writing's like his main like dream, drive, all that stuff. Basically, he's interviewing to be the caretaker over the winter because this place is closed from, I think, November, I want to say, until May 1st. I don't know why I remember the end date, but not the start date. But yeah, they just need someone to keep up with the machinery, make sure the generator's working, and that, the place doesn't overheat or underheat and doesn't freeze, all that stuff. And just like keep an eye on it while they're closed for the winter. And, Jack asks like, hey, like, well, why don't you just leave it open for skiing and stuff? It seems like the perfect place. And he's like, yeah, well, that's true, but it's just not worth the cost of keeping the road open, because basically if they opened as like a ski resort, they'd be the ones paying to have the roads stay clear, and it's this like 25-mile stretch of road, and that gets an average of 20 feet of snow per winter. So it's just not feasible financially, which could totally make sense. It's just a lot cheaper to have one guy or one family come and stay. So he goes over a little bit like what his duties are going to be like, and says that the main thing that they're worried about is the isolation. I think that's why they like want a family versus just one person. And then he's like hesitantly mentions like, well, we should note that there was an incident in 1970 where the caretaker basically went crazy and killed his family with an axe. And Jack's face like during this is just very, very serious. It's there's a lot of, and I'll mention a couple of them, but there's a lot of like interesting facial expressions that are kind of no expression. and you're getting no like reaction where it seems like there should be a reaction. And this is one of those instances. He's just very like, you know, and just taking it all in. It says like, yeah, 1970, a guy named Charles Grady was the caretaker, went crazy, killed his family, his two twin daughters, and his wife with an axe. Stacked them in one of the rooms in the west wing, and then put a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself. So basically, he's just giving him this information like, hey, like, I don't want you to find out about this the wrong way. And full disclosure, this is what you could be getting into. So I just want to let you know. But, like, the experts say it was just a classic case of cabin fever and all this stuff. And then, yeah, and then they think that at that point, the scene cuts away to Danny in the bathroom. He's, like, standing on, like, a little, step stool that you'd have for, like, a little kid because he's, brushing his teeth in the mirror. But he's having a conversation with Tony in the mirror. And so he goes back and forth with his, like, regular speaking voice, and then he does that, like, little gruff, like, Tony voice as well. And he's like, Tony, do you think Dad got the job? And Tony's like, he did. And that he's going to call Wendy here in a little bit. And then we hear the phone ring. Wendy picks up the phone, and we just hear, never mind. We do see both sides of the conversation. But find out that he got the job, but he has to stay there and do more paperwork, and he'll be home, like, late, like, after dinner and stuff like that. Danny is asking Tony, like, why don't you want to go to the hotel? And he's like, I can't tell you. And he's like, come on, please, and just kind of like begs Tony. And Tony finally does show him. And then we see Danny kind of freeze up a little bit. And like his eyes get all big. And then we're seeing like what Tony's showing him. And then Tony's showing him like visions of the hotel. We're seeing the famous, the blood coming out of the elevator doors, and flash of the twins that will come into play later. Both like probably two of the most famous, like, iconic images of the film that anyone would recognize, even if you don't or haven't seen the film. We then cut to a doctor is there in Danny's bedroom with Danny, just kind of asking him questions like, hey, like what's the last thing you remember, like, before waking up, or stuff like that. And he's like, I remember my mom saying, wake up, Danny, wake up. And like, what were you doing before that? I was brushing my teeth. Well, what about before that? Like, I was talking to Tony. And she asked some questions about Tony, like, well, who's Tony? Is he your imaginary friend? Is he one of your stuffed animals? He says, Tony's the little boy who lives in my mouth. And then she's like, okay, like, if you were to open your mouth, could I see Tony? And no, because he goes and hides. And where does he hide? He hides in my stomach. She's being very, like, kind and gentle with them and everything. Not, like, trying to make them feel, like, weird or anything like that. Like, it's like, are you crazy? Which is refreshing, especially for movies of this time. I feel like the trend would be to be like, oh, you're crazy, the kids are crazy, stuff like that. Just like very like clinical and logical, but accepting and kind and nurturing, I guess. So she basically just tells them like, okay, like, I need you to do me a favor and just rest for the day and stay in bed. So then she goes out into the living room with Wendy. I don't think I noted this before, but Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, like an amazing performance from her. But so they go out into the living room and talk. The doctor tells Wendy, like, hey, like, it's nothing to worry about. Like, these things happen with kids all the time. And a lot of times there's no explanation and it never happens again. But also, just on the safe side, if it does happen again, then let us know, So just very reassuring and everything. Like, it's okay. It's not necessarily like a seizure. It's just kind of like almost like a self-hypnosis type thing, or I forget what the actual term she used. But then she starts to ask Wendy some questions like, oh, like when did Tony, like, or how long have you lived in Boulder? And like, oh, just about a year or so. And it's like, is that when Tony started to come around? Like, no, that was probably about when Danny started grade school or nursery school, I think is what she said. And like, oh, like, did he adjust well to that? No, not really. But I think that's when I first started noticing Tony, that or around his injury. And like, oh, what sort of injury? Oh, he dislocated his shoulder. Oh, how did he manage to do that? And then Wendy's like, well, you see, Jack, Tony or Danny's father, came home late, like 3 hours late one night, and he had been drinking, and so he wasn't in really a good mood. And Danny had scattered some of Jack's papers around, and Jack got upset and tried to pull him, or grabbed Danny's arm to pull him away, but, grabbed him a little too hard, and it ended up dislocating his shoulder. And it's really interesting how, like, you could see and hear Wendy, like, trying to make it seem like it's not that big of a deal. But, you could tell that she knows that it is, but trying to play it off. But this is another one of those instances of the like a facial expression, like showing no emotion one way or the other. And I'm talking about the doctor in this case. It's just like, they show her face and she's just like no expression one way or the other, like, oh my God, that's abuse, or yeah, that's fine, or, nothing. We're getting no information from the doctor whatsoever. And I think that's definitely on purpose. And because, that's all we need to know is like Wendy's thoughts on it, because the doctor isn't going to be around for the rest of the movie. And it's just, it's a very smart way to show something that happens, unfortunately, far too often, is that there's these people in these semi-abusive relationships that it's not outright red flag central, but there's enough of them there to like be a little like, okay, like, hey, that's probably not good, and either get that checked out or get out, But yeah, I think they just Shelley Duvall just does such a good job of like portraying that without outright saying anything. But she ends the story with saying that, like, well, like, ever since then, like, Jack promised, like, he vowed to never touch a drop of alcohol again, and he's been sober ever since, I think 5 months ago that this happened. He'll say later. Just ends with finding out that Jack's been sober the whole time, and then move on. Get another card that says closing day, and so we cut to the family. They're driving up that same road, and we see all three of them in the car together. Actually, one of the very few scenes of all three of them together. I mean, they're technically together throughout the whole movie, but like, there's not a lot of like actual single shots of all three main characters together. And they're driving up in their little, I think it's a little yellow Bug, I'm pretty sure, VW. They talk a little bit about just like how the air is so different up there, and then just how beautiful it is. And then Wendy asks, like, hey, isn't it around here that the Donner Party got stuck? And Jack says, no, I think that was further west in the Sierras. And Danny asks, like, hey, what's the Donner Party? And Jack says, like, well, it's a group of settlers that got stuck in the snow and ended up resorting to cannibalism. And Danny's like, you mean they ate each other up? And then like Wendy's like a little hesitant to continue this story, and then Danny's like, "Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I learned it on TV." And then Jack, like, kind of, he smirks and he's like, "You hear that? That's fine. He learned about it on the television." And it's just one of like a few times that Jack shows his sinister side without being like outright scary, you know? But it's just like a little hint here and there. We then cut to Jack waiting in the lobby, reading a Playgirl magazine for some reason. Never outright acknowledged or anything like that. It's just one of those like subtle details that it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it just makes you go, huh, weird. But yeah, puts the magazine down when Mr. Ullman comes, and then they get up and get started on the tour. We see that their luggage is behind him in the lobby, and it's a massive pile of luggage that seems like it's would not fit like on or inside this car that they came up in, but there it is. But they get started with this tour of the hotel. We cut to Danny playing darts in the like one of the break rooms or game room, something like that. And as he's playing darts, he goes to get the darts out of the dartboard after he throws three, pulls them out and turns around, and then there's the twins that we saw in his vision that Tony showed him. And they're just like standing in there looking at him, and then they look to each other, turn around, and then leave the game room. You know, that's it for now. Cut back to the tour. We see them showing where they're going to be staying, saying like, oh, this little apartment. It's got a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and then a smaller bedroom for your son. And they're like, oh, this is going to be perfect. And he's like, and we're, worst case scenario, if you want to spread out, you can have the whole hotel to yourself. So like, just do whatever you want, We then see the large hedge maze out the side of the hotel, like huge, like 12-foot hedges and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, like it's great. Just make sure you have plenty of time, because you could get stuck out here for hours, before you find your way out. We get the casual, offhanded line about the hotel being built on an, quote, ancient Indian burial ground. Major trope for any ghost movie. You got Poltergeist, this, Pet Cemetery, a bunch of different movies that definitely overused, but it's definitely one of those like, oh, by the way, the place is haunted, without saying outright that it's haunted. And then they show them the snowcat, which is like the basically a tractor that can drive through the snow. In case of emergencies, if they had to get down the mountain or whatever, then they're not completely stranded. Show them the gold ballroom, and they make a reference to like, hey, like Wendy says like we could throw a big party here, and then he's like, well, like, or Mr. Ullman says like, only if you brought your own supply, like we have to take all the liquor out for insurance purposes. And then Jack says, well, we don't drink, and he's like, well, then that works out perfectly. But yeah, big ballroom. It's got a bar in it, which is empty at this point, bathrooms and everything. And it's here in the ballroom that we get introduced to probably besides the main three Torrances, the next biggest character in the film, and that's Dick Halloran. He's I forget his job title actually, but he's there to show Wendy around, like where the kitchen is and everything, and basically he's like the guy who was in charge of like the staff and the caretakers and stuff like that. But he's played by Scatman Carruthers. And something interesting is I recently read through, I listened to the audiobook. I've been trying to read Stephen King's It for probably close to 20 years at this point, and I just like I'm not much of a reader, honestly. That's why I love movies so much, but I'm a very visual person, and I probably have some undiagnosed ADHD or something like that because I just always get distracted while reading. But finally just broke down and got the audiobook and listened all the way through it. And it was cool because I know, and I already knew this before, that Stephen King connects a lot of his books like very loosely. And there was mention of Dick Halloran in there in a flashback from Mike's grandpa or dad, I forget. But either way, uh, Dick Halloran made a cameo in It, and I thought that was pretty cool. But anyways, played by Scatman Crothers, he's there, and he's gets introduced to the family. Goes to show Wendy and Danny break off from the tour, and they're gonna get their own separate tour with Dick, and he shows them the kitchen, the pantry, the freezer. And during their like little tour, at some point, well, a couple times, Dick calls like, hey, like talks to Danny and calls him Doc, which is what Jack and Wendy call him. And she makes note of this, like, hey, like I noticed you calling him Doc, like how'd you know we call him Doc? And he's like, oh, I must have heard you say it. It's just like, yeah, it's possible, but I don't remember calling him Doc. But he just plays it off. But then when he's showing them the pantry and he's like listing all these things that are there in stock for them, he turns to Danny, and we're getting this like ominous, oh my God, I hate that stupid thumbs up thing. We're getting this like ominous tone and everything. And he turns to Danny, and even though he's talking out loud to Wendy, we hear his voice directly to Danny, like, how'd you like some ice cream, Doc? And so he like speaks telekinetically or telepathically. I forget the difference, directly to Danny. And so at a certain point, he's done showing Wendy around. Oh yeah, they meet back up with Mr. Ullman and that group. And they're like, hey, like we needed to show Wendy some stuff. You mind if we steal her from you? And Dick's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, hey, do you guys mind if I get some ice cream for Danny here? And then Jack and Wendy are like, no, that's fine. Like, go ahead. We then get this scene between Dick and Danny where they're eating ice cream in the kitchen, and this is where Dick says to Danny, like, hey, like, how'd you know, or, how do you think I knew that they called you Doc, and how, that I talked to you like that and all that stuff. And then he basically says, like, me and my grandma used to have entire conversations without ever opening our mouths. And she called it shining. So it's like this gift that some people have and some people don't, basically, And he's like, I always thought that it was just the two of us that can do it. And then I got older and found out that there's other people out there that have this gift. And I have it, and I think you have it. And then I forget how they get on the subject, but they start talking about Tony. And I forget if it's a certain question that Dick asks or just something that Danny says, but they get on this, subject of Tony. And he's like, does Tony ever told you anything about the Overlook Hotel? And he's like, yeah, but I'm not supposed to say. And he's like, why not? And he's like, I don't know. And it's like, does your mom and dad know about Tony? And he's like, yeah, they do. And have you ever told them about what Tony has showed you or told you? And then he says, no, like, Tony said to never tell them. And so then he asks, like, what do you think about the, like, he asks about the Overlook Hotel. Danny does. And he's like, is this place bad? Like, and Dick's like, well, he doesn't beat around the bush except a little bit. And he says, like, I think there's things that happen that leave traces, kind of like burnt toast, like the smell of burnt toast, and just like there's some people that shine and some that don't, some places can do something like that. And I think that the Overlook does something that's a little similar to Shining, but like whatever, like the, place version of doing it rather than person. And he asks like if he likes it there, and then they just keep talking about the hotel. But then Danny asks like, "What about room 237?" And is like, "What about room 237?" And he's like, are you afraid of room 237?" And then Dick's whole demeanor changes at this point, and he just gets like real serious. And he's like, "No, like I'm not. There's nothing to be afraid of there." And he's like, and he asks like, "Did Tony ever tell you or show you what's in room 237?" And he even asks like, "No, like, but what is in there?" And he's like, "Nothing. And there's nothing to worry about, but don't ever go in there." So he gets like real serious about it, but doesn't exactly say like what the deal is with that room. So then we get the next info card saying a month later, and we see Wendy pushing a breakfast cart through the hotel, and then we see Danny riding his big wheel around, and we get this like it's so cool how they did it with the sound design. And we get because they had like the microphone right there, and it was the change in tones of the wheels on the carpet versus the wheels on the hard floor, and it just keeps like switching as he's like going around in a circle. And this awesome tracking shot like directly behind with the Steadicam and everything. The actual like inventor of the Steadicam, I forgot his name, but he worked on this movie. And I don't remember if he invented it for this, but either way, it's, if you need a Steadicam shot, you get the guy that invented it, and that's why it looks so awesome. And we see Wendy bring the cart into the room where Jack is asleep. And she wakes him up and she's like, "Oh, good morning, hon. Breakfast is ready." And he's like, "Oh, what time is it?" It's like, "It's 11:30 something." And he's like, "Oh, like, I guess I've been staying up too late," or, stuff like that. And, everything's pretty normal at this point. Nothing weird yet. But Jack does mention, because they're talking about like, "Oh, do you love it here?" and stuff like that. And Wendy's like saying like, "Yeah, like she likes it a lot." And Jack's like, "Man, I love it. Like I fell in love the first time I saw it when I interviewed here." And he's like, and he says that it was almost as if he's been here before. And he's like, "It's not quite like deja vu, but it was almost as if I knew what was going to be around every single corner." We get a shot of Jack throwing a tennis ball against the like one of like the big murals inside the lobby, and he's just like throwing it against the wall, and he catch it and he throw it. And we're hearing the big like echoing sounds. Like, speaking of big echoing sound, did you hear my stomach there? And he's just throwing it, and it was a little disrespectful of the artwork in there, I'd say, but whatever. Then we see Wendy and Danny heading out to the maze. They're all like bundled up and everything. It hasn't started snowing yet or anything, but they go out in the maze, and we see Jack. I guess he decides he's done throwing the tennis ball around, and goes and looks at the model of the maze, which is like on this big table. And one of the coolest shots is it's a slow zoom down from above the maze, but it's like of the model, but but you see the little movement of Wendy and Danny in the middle of the maze. And it's a real cool like transitional shot from the model to the actual maze, which apparently they did like do a crane shot of the maze and then superimposed a shot that they did like between some apartment buildings or something like that, like they just built the center and filmed them from above. So it looks amazing. And then we get my favorite transition to a one of the title info cards where it's just in all caps Tuesday, and like even the music's like and it's just like so like crazy because it's like, oh my god, the scariest thing imaginable, a Tuesday. So then it's like, obviously we had like, here's what the scene is, and then it's like a month later, and now we're getting like a little more like zeroing in on like what's going to happen, because now it's like day by day, and then as we'll see later, it's going to be like, hour by hour type deal. But yeah, Tuesday. We see Danny on the big wheel again. This time he's in one of the upper floors, the one that has like a balcony, like over the lobby, basically, because we see like the big opening. But this time he's like actually like on like the carpet, the iconic orange carpet from, the logo of the podcast. But, that everyone should recognize if they've seen the movie. But this time, while he's driving around, he slows down and looks up at a door and gets up, and we realize that, oh, it's room 237. And he like kind of goes up to it and touches the doorknob, but I forget. Yeah, I don't think he sees anything at this point, and if he does, then we don't see it. But he touches it and then kind of backs away and gets down on his big wheel. And I like that he like kind of pushes the back wheel to like kind of get it started a little bit, and then drives off. We see Jack typing in the like in one of like the big common rooms, and he's just typing away, and Wendy comes and talks to him, and he starts like this is where he starts to like get annoyed with her, and she's like, hey, like it's I heard on the radio it's gonna start snowing, and we're gonna get like a big snowstorm. And he's like, and what do you want me to do about it? And it's just like, what? Like nothing, I was just like telling you. And then he like, this is where he like berates her. He's like, every time you come in here while I'm typing, it breaks my concentration, and then I got to start over. He like picks up his papers and like kind of crumples them and throws them, and just like yells at her. And it's like, if you hear me typing, better yet, if you don't hear anything, if I'm in this room, you leave me the fuck alone. That means I'm busy. And he said, and she just kind of like, oh, okay, like very timidly, like, okay. And he's like, now why don't you get started and get the fuck out of here? And then I was like, oh, okay. Now we're starting to see a little bit of a change in him. And then we get the Thursday, another big, like, scary music sting and everything. And this is where we see Wendy and Danny playing out in the snow. But then we cut to Jack, and this is like one of those iconic, the Kubrick stare. And I don't know if I talked about it in the other Kubrick episodes, Eyes Wide Shut, and because I'm trying to think of what the Kubrick stare from Eyes Wide Shut is. Anyways, doesn't matter. But like, or like Alex DeLarge in Clockwork Orange, just like staring straight into the camera and everything. But we get Jack Nicholson, or Jack Torrance, staring out the window at them, and just like that, and just like super creepy, like it's so perfect. And I love everything about it, because they're kind of like slow zooming away from him, or is it in? I don't remember, but I love how I'm like, it's so iconic, and now I can't remember which direction the zoom is going, if it's towards or away. But anyways, I could picture it, and he's got this like green turtleneck and everything, and just like no blink, just staring out the window. And it's like, and this is like kind of like, hey, by the way, he's mentally not too stable right now. And then we get the Saturday card, And Wendy goes to make a phone call and realizes that the phones are down. So she, or suspects that the phones may be down because the phone call's not going through. Gets on the radio, radios for a park ranger or anybody, and, gets the ranger station and is like, hey, like, we're at the Overlook Hotel. And he's like, oh, like, they know what's going on. So like, hey, like, how are you doing over there? Like, oh, we're fine. Just noticed that the phones were down. I wonder if that was like normal. And he's like, yeah, like though they go down pretty much every winter, and they're probably going to stay that way till May. So it's best that you keep your radio on just in case, and turn it up loud so that way you could hear wherever you're at in the hotel. Get another scene of Danny riding his big wheel through the halls, but this time when he turns a corner, he sees the twins like down at the end of the hall. And so he like immediately stops and is like kind of frozen in fear, like, oh God, like what's going on? And they're just standing there, but this time they talk to him and they're like in unison, like, hello, Danny. And then they start saying like, come play with us, Danny. Come play with us forever and ever and ever. And then as they're saying this, like repeating forever and ever and ever, then we get flashes of their dead bodies, because these are the twins that got murdered by their dad with an axe. And we see the axe and the bodies and the hallway covered in blood. And it's just like flash back and forth between those two things. And then he, finally covers his eyes and then like looks through his fingers and then they're gone, And then he starts talking to Tony and he's like, Tony, like, I'm scared. And then he's like, remember what Mr. Haller had said. They're just like pictures in a book. It's not real. So, and this is an interesting bit of information that really makes you ponder the reality of anything that happens. And it's like, the way I see it is that the things are there, but they can only affect you if you let them. You know what I mean? Like it is haunted. There is spiritual activity there, but it can only affect you if you let it, that type of thing, Or maybe Tony is just like setting him up for failure, because we don't know, like, is Tony good for Danny or bad for Danny? We don't know. Is he looking out for Tony or is he work for the hotel? I don't know. But either way, he says, like, it's just like pictures in a book. They're not real, But then we get the Monday card. And Danny and Wendy are in one of the common areas. They're watching TV. They got the super awesome old CRT and like the wood frame with like the feet and everything. But one thing that's interesting that I've seen pointed out a bunch of times, and something that people overthink all the time, is that the TV has no cord, which is super interesting. But I've heard it that it, people overthink it and think that it has like some like significance or symbolism or something like that. And I think it really came down to Stanley Kubrick saying like, well, because it looks dumb with the cord. Like, so we like taped it to the leg and then it just looks better without a cord there, And he's right, but it's just so funny. Like all those little things like that people like blow out of proportion, and it's just like, well, it just looked better that way, Sometimes it's just that simple. But Danny says to Wendy, like, hey, like, can I go get my fire engine out of my room? And she's like, no, like, can you wait? Because your dad's asleep. He like just went to sleep. And it's the morning, so he's been up like all night apparently. And he's like, I promise I'll be really quiet. And she's like, okay, like, just be real quiet, like, but don't wake him up because he'll get upset, And so he sneaks up to the room and he gets in there and Jack is awake. And also Danny's wearing this like awesome like Mickey Mouse sweater that's just like super cool. Like Danny Torrance is a fashion icon in this, with the bowl cut, the sweaters, and then the big collar on the shirt and everything. And yeah, I want like most of his wardrobe, but I love his Mickey sweater here. But yeah, like I said, Jack's awake and he's just like sitting there, like kind of, staring off into space again, but and just like sitting on the bed. And it's like, okay, like that's a little weird. But he acknowledges Danny when he comes in and he's like, hey, like, why don't you come here for a minute? And, sits Danny on his lap and it's like, hey, like, how do you like it here? And Danny's like, fine, but you could tell he's like a little apprehensive, and and he asks, he's like, Dad, like, are you, oh yeah, Dad, do you feel bad? And he's like, no, I'm just tired. And he's like, well, why don't you go to sleep? And he's like, I can't, I just have too much to do. He asks his dad, do you like this hotel? And he's like, yeah, I love it. Like, I just want to stay here. I wish we could stay here forever and ever and ever. And the way he says it, like, is verbatim the way that the Grady twins are like, come play with us forever and ever. Like the same cadence, everything. And Danny definitely clocks this, but he doesn't make it obvious or anything like that. But because he really is just like kind of trying to gauge with his dad, like, okay, like, did the hotel get to you? What's going on? Like, do I need to be afraid of you? Because he could see that there's some kind of change going on. And probably Tony is also letting him know, like, hey, like, watch out for your dad. But then he flat out asks him, like, you wouldn't hurt me and mommy, would you? And Jack's tone changes. He's like, where would you get a thing like that? Like, did your mom ask you that? Like, did your mom say I would hurt you? And Danny's like, no, she didn't say that. Just making sure, that type of thing. He plays it off, but this like plants a seed in Jack apparently. Then we get the Wednesday card, and Danny's playing on the floor in one of like the hexagonal carpet hallways or whatever, and the ball like rolls up to him, the tennis ball that his dad was throwing earlier, like rolls up to him while he's playing with his cars, and it like rolls like right down the center of like the brown stripe in the carpet pattern. But what's interesting is when Danny stands up, the carpet's flipped and there is no stripe leading up to him, it's leading away from him. And so it's one of those like interesting inconsistencies that is debated. Was it on purpose? Was it not? But yeah, the ball like rolls to him and he stands up and looks around and he's like, hello, mom, seeing if it was like his mom rolled it to him, if his dad rolled it to him. He's wearing another iconic sweater. He's got his Apollo 11 sweater, and this is what everyone, I guess this is the key bit of evidence. The fact that he's wearing an Apollo 11 sweater means that Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing. Grade A detective work, I guess. But he follows like where the ball came from and notices that room 237 is open, and it's got the key in it and everything, and the door's open. And so he goes over there, a little slow, and goes inside, and then it cuts to Wendy. She's in the generator room, and she's got like her like clipboard and notebook, and just basically doing like the checklist to make sure that the generators are fine and everything like that. But she hears Jack kind of screaming, but like kind of like a weird scream, and we see that he's asleep at his desk where the typewriter is, and is like having a nightmare, but like talking in his sleep, like screaming in his sleep, like and then it's just like progressively getting like more frantic. And she goes and like finally like wakes him up, and he kind of like falls out of his chair, and he's got like this big old drool like coming down, and he's like, oh my god, it was horrible, I had the most horrible nightmare. And he was like, I dreamt that I killed you and Danny, and I dreamt that I didn't just kill you though, I chopped you up into little bits. And it's like, all right, like that's, so she's a little like put off by this, but as they're talking and she's like comforting him and trying to like get him back up to his feet and back into his chair, Danny comes in, and he's like, You could tell he's like kind of in like a little bit of a trance because he's walking very slowly. He's got his thumb in his mouth, which is like the first time we see him do anything like this. So he's like sucking his thumb, but then we see that like something's off with his clothes, and his like the shoulder of his sweater is like ripped. Wendy's trying to tell him like, hey, like it's okay, your dad's fine, like just go play in your room for a little bit and I'll come see you. But he's just like, not responding and just keeps walking in slowly. So she goes and like, Danny, like I'm talking to you, like you need to listen, like go to your room. And she walks up to him and realizes like that, his shirt's ripped and everything, and looks at him. He's all disheveled, and there's bruises on his neck and a little bit on his face too. And it's just like Danny, what happened? And she's like trying to talk to him, and then she turns and looks at Jack and just like, you did this to him, didn't you? Like, and just like freaks out and picks him up and like you're a monster, all this stuff, and then like picks up Danny and like walks back up to the room, and Jack's just like, but another one of those like blank expressions that just like not saying like it's not outright like, what are you talking about, you're crazy, I didn't touch him, like how could I touch him, like, but also not, and it's not anger and it's not like confusion, it's just like, it's so weird. But then we see Jack like walking through the halls like near the ballroom, and now he's starting to act like a little crazy because he's like kind of just like punching the air and like grabbing at the air, and then it's like almost like he's like grabbing at like someone's neck or like to like bear hug him or like strangle him and stuff like that, and just like just doing stuff like that, just like acting like erratic. He gets to the gold ballroom and goes inside, and he's just like kind of like looking around and everything, and he goes and sits at the bar, and he's like, I'd give anything for a drink right now. And he even says like, quote, like, I'd sell my goddamn soul for a beer, for just a beer, or just a sip of beer or something like that. We get this like head-on shot of him like looking like directly into the camera, because he kind of like goes like that and just right down the barrel, and then he just starts like talking to a bartender, and he's like, hi Lloyd, like best bartender in the world, like from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine, or Portland, Oregon for that matter, but then camera turns and there is somebody there. There is a bartender, and now all of a sudden there's liquor in the bar and everything like that. And so he's talking to this Lloyd bartender, and all of this stuff has appeared and everything like that, so now we're getting our first he's getting his first visual evidence of there being a ghost, I guess. Or is it all in his head? We don't know. So he pours him he orders a bourbon on the rocks and pours him some Jack Daniels, which I don't think is a bourbon, if I remember right. I feel like it's just a whiskey. But, I mean, at least that's how it's labeled. But I know Jim Beam is a bourbon, but I don't think Jack Daniels is. But it doesn't matter. That's just alcoholic talk. But yeah, orders a bourbon on the rocks, starts drinking it, and he does a cheers to, here's the 5 miserable months on the wagon, and all this stuff. So basically cheers to his broken sobriety. And he starts talking about Danny's injury, basically like starts venting that like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe like she would blame me for this. Like I only dislocated a shoulder one time. It's, could have happened to anybody, that type of thing. Then Wendy comes in like all frantic, and now when Wendy comes in, there's nobody there at the bar, and there's no glass, there's no liquor or anything like that. But she comes in and she's like, Jack, there's someone else in the hotel. There's a crazy woman, and like Danny went to this room, and this crazy woman in the bathtub tried to strangle Danny. And he's like, what, are you out of your fucking mind? And it's so funny, like just like from going to talking to a ghost bartender to turn around and just tell your wife that says like there's someone else at the hotel that she's fucking crazy for believing that, even though the alternative is you strangled your son. But whatever. I guess that he like could have done it to himself, but yeah, I love his delivery on that. It's just so funny and so like. But he's like, oh, she's like, she's in one of the rooms, and he's like, says, what room? We now cut to Dick Halloran at his home in Florida. I think Miami. I mean, he's watching Miami news, but you know, he could just be in one of like the neighboring areas. But he's in Florida. He's got like one of the like, I don't know. I'm realizing now, like after rewatching it, that I think my whole decorating style has been like loosely, like subconsciously based on Dick Halloran's bachelor pad in Miami, because he's got like all this like mid-century modern furniture and stuff like that, and it's just like super vintage and retro and awesome. I one thing I don't have is giant nude portraits of models with giant afros like he does, and that's he's got one on he's got one behind the bed and one behind the TV. But yeah, I love like the look of his place and everything. But we see him; he's in bed watching TV, and then we get that like ominous like tone again. The starts going, and then we're like slow zoom. There's a slow zoom in and a slow zoom out, but it's like going in on his face, and he's like, you know, you could tell like something is happening like in his mind and everything. And then we're cutting between Dick Halloran's face, like, you know, shining, with Danny, who's like, he's like foaming at the mouth and like almost like having like a seizure type deal. And then the third shot that we're going through is Jack going into, and it's a POV, or his point of view, going into the room 237. And we're seeing yet another very aesthetically pleasing, iconic carpet. And this time it's like green and purple, and it's like super, I don't know. I would love to have either of these carpets in my house someday. I would love to model my bathroom after this bathroom in room 237. It's so cool. But as beyond the point. He goes into the room, no one in the room, and he goes into the bathroom, which, you know, Wendy said, it's a woman in the bathroom tried to strangle Danny. Jack walks into the bathroom, and a hand comes and opens the shower curtain, and there's a nude woman in the bathtub. And then, you know, Jack gets this like devious smirk on his face because there's a naked woman that's not his wife in there. And she slowly stands up. Everything's happening in slow motion from their end. And she stands up slowly, gets out of the tub, and they kind of like walk towards each other and meet in the like center of the bathroom. And then they like embrace each other and start kissing. And then we get like a close up of Jack, you know, in this embrace with this woman. And then he kind of opens his eyes and looks into the mirror, and then kind of like, oh my God. And then we get, you know, pull back, and we see that the woman has changed into this like much older kind of decayed body. And then she starts like this like evil laugh, and like you know, and just starts like laughing at him, and Jack's horrified, and he's like backing out of the bathroom. And then we're like flashing from her like walking towards him, like, and you just see all like the rot and everything like that. And we see that it's flashing between that and her body like in the so presumably she's a woman that died in the bathtub and then just like slowly rotted until someone found her, basically. So Jack backs all the way out of the room, and, closes it and locks it, and then just backs away from the door. And he's like, visibly shook at this point. We cut back to Dick, and he's making a phone call to the hotel, or trying to make a phone call to the hotel, and obviously the lines are down, so it doesn't go through. And then cut to Jack getting to the apartment setup that they have at the hotel, and goes in and talks to Wendy and says like, hey, like I went there and there was no one there, like, so just completely lies and like, I don't know what you're talking about, like. And then Wendy's like, well, something is happening, and like I don't know what's going on, and I think we just need to get Danny out of here. And then like Jack's demeanor changes again. He's like, get him out of here? Like, you mean like leave the hotel? And you could tell like the wheels are turning, like that can't happen. So, and then he starts berating her again. And we're also cutting to we see Danny is like in his room, and his eyes are all big and his mouth's like open, but he's like in a trance again, and we can hear the audio of them talking about him, like but it's all like distorted when he's hearing it. And he's like, it's like, do you ever think like about my responsibilities as caretaker here, and like leaving would put me in jeopardy, and like all this stuff, and just like yelling at her, like calling her selfish and stuff like that. But what's crazy is like, when he's like finally done yelling at her and he gets up to like storm out of the room, he looks directly into the camera, and it's like a kind of a tracking shot of him like going across the room, like the camera's like in the corner and it's just like following him. And as he like walks past the camera, he like looks like out of the corner of his eye like directly into the camera, and it's like one of those, if you're not looking for it, you blink and you miss it type deals. But yeah, real interesting shot. So he's like walking through the hotel getting all like worked up again, and he could hear some like big band music like playing like off in the distance. So he's like kind of like, like what's that all about? And he looks down the hall like towards like where the ballroom is, and there's all these like party decorations, like balloons and streamers and confetti and stuff. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. But then cut to Dick. He gets a hold of the Rangers at the ranger station. And he's like, hey, like this is Dick Halloran from the Overlook. I just was trying to check in on the family that's staying there, but the phone lines are down. Could you like check on them for me? And they're like, oh yeah, we'll try them on the radio. And he's like, okay, like I'll call back in a few minutes. Cut back to Jack going into the gold ballroom, and this time it is full of people, and they're all dressed like it's the 1920s, and this is where the big band music was coming from. And I forget, it might be, it's either like Benny Goodman, like Glenn Miller. I don't know if it's one of their two songs, but it's like that type of vibe, for sure. He heads to the bar, gets another bourbon, and goes to pay, and Lloyd's like, no, like your money's no good here, like orders of the house. And he's like, oh, okay, and so he gets up to go to the bathroom, and he's kind of like dancing and being silly, and a waiter comes, but he has like a tray full of drinks, goes to get out of the way of some ladies that are coming, and runs into Jack and spills all over him. And he's like, oh, so sorry, sir. And he's like, oh, no worries. Like, he's like, well, like it's advocat, so, and it tends to stain. So let's go to the bathroom and I'll, make sure it doesn't stain on you. And he's like, oh, okay. But one funny thing that, took me a few watches to notice is that he's like, oh, looks like you got some on yourself there too. And then he like wipes his hand on the back of the waiter. And so they head into the bathroom, and he asks him like, hey, like, so what's your name? And he says, oh, my name's Delbert Grady. And then Jack's like, that sounds familiar, And it should sound familiar because this is the caretaker that went crazy and killed his family. But another interesting inconsistency is that when we hear the story first in the beginning, they use the name Charles Grady. And also the fact that that incident, according to Mr. Ullman, took place in 1970, but everyone here is dressed like it's the 1920s and has like the accents and acts like it's the 1920s. So just very interesting. But I mean, a little more on that, and I'll have like a theory on that later. So he talks to him and he's like, "Hey, like, are you Delbert Grady? You got family or what?" And he's kind of trying to, scope it out without coming right out with what he thinks. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I got 2 daughters and stuff like that." And he's like, you were the caretaker. Like, I read about you. You were the caretaker here and you killed your family." And he's like, "No, you're the caretaker here. You've always been the caretaker. And I should know because I've always been here." And then so he kind of gets some more, and now his demeanor's changed too. And he's just like super straightforward. And he's like, "Did you know that your son is attempting to bring a outside party into this situation?" And, he's telling him that, his son's bringing Dick Halloran up there. I mean, says he's bringing an N-word, and which, I mean, I know for a fact that is something that came from Stephen King, I'm sure, and not from Stanley Kubrick, but I don't know. And Stephen King puts that word in his books a lot, and yes, they were written at a different time, and I think in his mind he's doing it as like, oh, to show that these are bad people that are using that word. But I think which I think is logically better than the way Tarantino uses it in Pulp Fiction, but if you look at me on the on the YouTube, I'm not the authority on what's incorrect or correct use of that word. But in my opinion, I think I think that even though Stephen King thinks that he's using it for a specific purpose to show that someone is a bad person, I think it comes off very weird, especially in some of the books. It's like, okay, like, come on, man, like, you really need to use it that many times? Like, maybe like one time, but maybe even not then. But I don't know. It's a whole thing, but it's very uncomfortable a lot of the times, like the way it's used or the frequency that it's used. But it's I'm sure in the movie it's used a lot less than it is in the actual book. But that being said, I haven't read The Shining yet. I plan on getting to that one next. But yeah, so Grady warns him that he's trying to bring Halloran there, and he's like, "Oh, like, your son's a very naughty boy. Like, my daughters like were like that once too, so I corrected them. And then when my wife didn't like that and tried to get in the way, I corrected her as well." And so then basically like, you know what you got to do? You got to kill your family. So we cut to Wendy back in the room. She's like contemplating out loud, like, it's okay. Like, I'll get Danny, we'll get in the snowcat, and we'll head down the mountain. And if Jack doesn't want to go, then we'll just have to tell him, like, then we're just going to go without you, And, she's very, like, on the verge of hysterics, and she's crying, and like her voice is all shaky. She's got, she's smoking. She's got a lot on her mind, obviously. And as she's like pacing back and forth, trying to figure this out with herself, then we hear from the other room, Danny is starting to like repeat. He's like, red rum, red rum. red rum, And so she's like, oh my God, like what's going on? She goes in there but he's just like in this trance and he like won't stop saying it and he just keeps going and going and she's trying to like snap him out of it. And then he finally stops and then he just kind of like looks at her and he says, Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. And so, she's obviously a little freaked out about that. We see Jack head to Ullman's office, and then we can hear the Rangers are trying to get a hold of them on the radio. And he just unscrews the back and pops the top off the radio and pulls out some fuses. I think that's what they are. Just, three things that just snapped in there. So pulls those out and kind of rattles them like dice and puts them in his pocket and leaves. So sabotage the radio so that way she can't contact anybody. And we cut to Halloran. He's talking to the Rangers again. He called them back and he's like, yeah, like we tried them, but they're either have the radio off or they're somewhere where they can't hear it, but I'll keep trying them throughout the night. And he's like, okay, that, thank you for that. I'll call in a few hours or something like that. But then it cuts to 8 a.m. So now we've gone from days to the hour. And we see it's I forgot what flight it is. It might be a Continental. But it's Halloran. He's on a flight going to Denver because he talks to the stewardess or flight attendant. Says, when will we be landing in Denver? She says, about 8:20. And he's like, okay, thank you. So he's on his way to like get involved since he can't get in contact with them. We get another short shot of Jack typing again. This is this one from behind, and we get another, zoom out, and then cut back to the Denver airport. We see the plane touching down on the snow. See Halloran call his friend Larry that works at a garage in the area. And he's like, hey, it's like, hey, Dick, like, how's it going? Like, how's the weather down there? He's like, actually, I'm in Denver. He's like, oh, what are you doing here? He's like, well, to tell you the truth, I got to get up to the Overlook. And because the people taking care of it turned out to be unreliable. He's like, completely unreliable assholes is what he says. And he's like, so I'm going to rent a car and head to you. And then, he asks him like what the roads are like. And he's like, oh, it's, snow's pretty bad and all the roads are closed. He's like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to borrow your snowcat then. He's like, I'll be to you in 5 hours. I got to get a rental car and all that. We see him driving and we can hear like on the radio a little bit, like some of the news about the weather and everything, how it's like this big blizzard. And we see a semi truck that's flipped. And it has like a small VW like pinned like between the trailer and the cab, but like it doesn't look too smashed, but it's still like it's a pretty gnarly accident because you got the trailer on its side and the cab's like upside down, and so like weather's pretty crazy. He's got to be driving pretty slow. Wendy and Danny are watching cartoons. They're watching Roadrunner up in the room. Danny's still out of it and in Tony mode still. So she tells him like, hey, like I'm going to go talk to your dad for a little bit, but I'm going to lock the door. And so just stay in here and everything's going to be fine. But we see in the background that she grabs the baseball bat before she heads downstairs. And so she goes into the big like common area where he's usually typing, and she's like calling like, Jack, you in here? And she goes up to the typewriter, which has changed colors, by the way. Another one of those like weird inconsistencies. And she goes to the typewriter and then notices like that, looks at the page that he's typing and notices that it's the same phrase over and over and over again. And it's just all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, over and over, and with some like variations. There's some like misspellings and there's some variations on like the spacing. And then she goes to like look at the stack of papers that are already typed and it's the same thing, but like he'll just change up the like layout of the page and everything. And it's just still all the same phrase, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, like over and over and over again. And so she's like flipping through, and then she's like obviously like getting like more concerned the more she's like reading it and everything. And then cut to the camera panning into the room, from behind a pillar. And then we see that Jack is standing there watching her look at this. And then he like breaks the tension with like, how do you like it? And then she screams and grabs the bat and turns around like real quick. And he's like, how can I help you? And he's being like real menacing, but like very calm at the same time. And she's like, oh, like I just wanted to talk. Like, and he's like, oh, I'm here. What do you want to talk about? And she's like, oh, I forgot, because she's like very scared at this point. And it's like, you forgot. Could it be about Danny? Is that what you wanted to talk about? That type of tone and everything. And then she's like, yeah, like I want to talk about Danny. Like, what about Danny? Like, what should be done with him? Like, you want to talk about what should be done with Danny. And then like, what do you think? And it's like, I think we should take him to a hospital. So now he starts to get a little more like aggressive with his like tone towards her. And he's like, when should we take him to a hospital? And she's like, as soon as possible. And he like mocks her like, as soon as possible. And stuff like that. And then, she's kind of like backing out of the room, like towards the stairs, and he's just like slowly following her and everything. She has the bat in her hand, and she starts backing up the stairs, and he's getting just more aggressive and everything. And he's like, Wendy, like put the bat down. I'm not gonna hurt you. And she's like, but now she's like getting more scared, and she's kind of like swinging at him a little bit, and it's like, honey, you didn't let me finish. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to bash your brains in. Just going to bash them right the fuck in. And, and he's like, give me the bat, honey. He's like, Wendy, and he's like, being like real, like hammy and like goofy, but like still scary. And like this is what makes me think that like no one could do this like as good as Jack Nicholson, because he's just so perfect at being like already scary and intense like at his baseline. And he's just like, he's being like so funny but so scary at the same time. It's so hard to like put it into words. But yeah, then he tries to like grab the bat, and she like hits him on the hand, and he like goes to like grab it like ow, and then she like hits him on the head, and then he like falls back down the stairs and like tumbles down and everything, and that like kind of like knocks him out, or puts him out of it at least, like incapacitates him. And she drags him to the pantry that locks and everything. And she's just like dragging him by his feet, and he's like, oh, like all disoriented and everything. He's like trying to like grab stuff, but he like doesn't have like the strength really. And she like struggles way too long with the lock, or because there's like a pin inside the door for the pantry, and she's just like trying to like open it, and then realizes, oh, I gotta take the pin out, and and drags him in there, and then he like starts to come to a little bit, and goes to like get up and grab the door before she can close it. But he had twisted his ankle when he fell down the stairs, and kind of like stumbles and falls into boxes of Rice Krispies. But she gets the door closed and gets it locked and everything, and he starts talking to her, and he's like, oh, Wendy, like I'm hurt real bad, trying to like get her to sympathize with him or whatever. And she's not falling for it. She grabs a knife, one of the kitchen knives, like one of the really long ones, to arm herself. Now she's like really upset and crying, obviously, for good reason. She's saying like, I'm going to get Danny and the snowcat, and we're going to go down the mountain, and get help. And then we'll come back for you. And then he starts laughing. He's like, oh, you got a big surprise coming for you. Why don't you go check the snowcat and the radio? And then he just starts laughing. But I love this camera angle of him, because he's like up against the door talking to her. but the camera's from like directly below. And it's like a super cool shot. And then I don't know why, I don't think there's any significance to it. It's just maybe just a thing that these types of doors have, but the doorknob's like really long, and I've always just like noticed that like since the first time I watched it, and always just thought that was, interesting. But it all like works like for this shot and adds to the mise en scène. So then we get the 4 p.m. info card, and we see Jack waking up from, he went to sleep inside the like on a pile of produce, and there's a knock on the door, and it's Grady like talking to him through the door. And he's like, hey, like some of us are thinking that maybe your head's not in this, and that you're not the one to carry this out. And he's like, no, like, come on, like I'll if you let me out of here, I'll do it right, And so this is, I think, the one concrete evidence that there is something supernatural, because how else could the door open without some kind of supernatural interference or intervention? Because he does get out of there. Like, Grady does open the door for him, and Grady is supposed to be dead. Then we cut to Dick. He's in the snowcat, and he's like heading up the road. He's on his way. He's coming, and slowly but surely. Then we cut to Danny, and he's up walking around the room, and Wendy's asleep in the bed. And Danny's like just walking around the room slowly going, red rum, but like real raspy. Now this I can do with my sick voice. He just keeps repeating it, and he goes over to the table. He picks up the kitchen knife and kind of like runs his finger on the blade. You don't really see if his like finger like bleeds or whatever, but apparently it's not. But then he's not satisfied with the results, I guess, because then he walks over to the vanity and picks up Wendy's lipstick, but he still has the knife in his hand, and he's still the entire time still doing the red rum, in that same cadence and everything, and then heads over to the door and starts writing red rum. The second R is backwards, I'm pretty sure, and maybe the E, but it just says red rum and lipstick on the white door. And then after he's done writing it, and he still has like the lipstick and the knife, and then he starts saying it like a little louder, red rum, red rum, red rum. And then now it's starting to become his own like regular speaking voice again. And he's just yelling it. And then this wakes up Wendy finally. And which, as a parent, I'm thinking you would have woken up a lot sooner, but you gotta also think that she's going on like way less sleep and way more trauma and stress than the average parent. But yeah, she wakes up, like is like, oh my God, like, why do you have a knife? Like takes the knife out of his hand and everything and hugs him like, Danny, like, it's okay. Like, stop. And then like, as she's hugging him, looks in the mirror and sees the red rum, which in the mirror spells murder. And then screams, and as she screams, then here comes Jack with an axe and starts chopping into the door. And so she screams, they get up and grab the knife and run into the bathroom and lock that door. And he's just like chopping away at the door. So one of the key inspirations for this scene was a silent film called The Phantom Carriage, and silent horror film, I think Sweden is where it's from. That's one that I only saw recently, but always knew that it was the inspiration for this scene. Great movie though. I should have had the Criterion out with me so I could show it, but whatever. Just trust that I own it. But yeah, he's chopping at the door. Wendy and Danny are in the bathroom. She gets the bathroom window open, and luckily there is a snowbank that is about the height of their fourth, fifth story window. Gets Danny out, or trying to get Danny out the window to slide down there. We'll get both of them out the window, hopefully. But then Jack gets through the first door, like to the main room, and like goes up to the like hole that he chopped it in. He says, "Wendy, I'm home," just all, like it's a sitcom or something. And gets that door open. She gets Danny out the window, but she can't fit through. Jack slowly meanders over to the bathroom door that she is behind, and he's like knocks on it like all soft, and he's like, little pig, let me come in." And apparently he ad-libbed a lot of this stuff because Kubrick just wanted him to just go crazy, and be crazy. And Jack Nicholson's just great at this, and so a lot of this stuff was ad-libbed. But he's like, little pig, let me come in. And he's like, not by the hair on my chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. And then he starts chopping at that door. And it's just cutting back between like this like crazy rack focus shots of him chopping at the door from the outside to inside the bathroom where we see her like screaming in the corner and like just amazing. And you can see like the wood like splitting and the axe coming through and everything like that. And just like, Jack, no, just screaming and everything. And then probably the most iconic scene from the entire movie is he puts his head he finally gets one of the panels like chopped through, and he puts his head through the like hole and says, "Here's Johnny," it's a reference to the old Tonight Show. Old Tonight Show. At this point, when he's like reaching his hand through to get the doorknob, she slices the back of his hand, which always like makes my hand hurt. Like, ugh. But and he retracts that and everything, and he's like holding his hand from bleeding. And then at this point, when they all calm down for a sec, they hear the snowcat outside because Dick Halloran's coming. And so they all stop and kind of listen, like, okay, like someone's here, and then Jack kind of wanders off, and then Wendy kind of like, calms down and collects herself in the bathroom. But another weird inconsistency that I've always noticed, but I haven't seen pointed out too often, is that he's chopping at the door and he's focusing on this one panel that he gets out. But after the snowcat's coming and we see like a reverse shot of the door, we notice that the other panel in the door is missing, but it's like a clean cut versus like the chopped cut of the other panel. So I don't know if that was just a mistake or what, but you could also see it from in the bathroom on those later shots. But we see Danny running through the kitchen to find a hiding spot because he went out the snowbank and then back into the hotel because why are you gonna go hide in the snow where it's probably below freezing. And so he hides in one of the metal cabinets in the kitchen and makes as much noise as possible for some reason. One of the only times I'm like, Danny, come on. I mean, otherwise he's like pretty smart for a lot of this movie, but that's like the one time where I'm like, all right, maybe you should do that quieter or not hide in the noisiest cabinet possible. But we see Dick go into the hotel, and then he's walking through the lobby and everything. He's like, hello, anybody here? And he's just like slowly walking through, and really good at like tension building because something's gonna happen, but you don't know what, and there's no like score or anything in this part. And he's just like walking, and then he gets to a certain point, and then you hear, then Jack comes around the corner, buries an axe right in his chest, and very reminiscent of the scene in Fargo that we just covered. So that's the second chest axe for this month. Dick screams, Danny screams because of their Shining connection, and Jack kind of gets up with the axe and then like has this smile like, okay, now I know where Danny's at. And he kind of like looks towards the kitchen, and then Danny gets out and he sees him get out of the cabinet and run down the hallway. and he starts chasing after him. But luckily, Jack, his leg's injured, so he's limping as he's doing this, and he chases after him. We see Wendy has now left the bathroom and is like going to look for Danny and also someplace safe to hide, probably too. She's walking around the hotel all frazzled, and then but she can hear these like weird chants that are happening, like but you can't really make out what they're saying. Maybe someone has before, but I don't know. But there's this like ominous chanting, and she kind of like clocks it and notices, and then like slowly goes up the stairs. She comes around a corner and she looks into an open room, and there we see a guy in a bear costume, but we only see like the back of it, the backside of it. It has like one of those butt flaps, which is open. So we see like some dude's ass sticking out of this bear suit. And then the bear like sits up. The bear's on his knees in front of the bed. And then the bear sits up and looks. And then we see that there is a man that was sitting on the edge of the bed who also sits up. So this guy in a bear costume's blowing some 1920s dude, and there's no explanation for it, nothing other than like Wendy sees it, and there we get the quick zoom, and she screams and runs away, and they're just like, what? Yeah, just one of those like crazy scenes that with no explanation, and I'm kind of glad there is no explanation because it's just so funny. We see Danny run outside. Jack comes up to the door, realizes that Danny went outside, decides to turn the lights on because there's like a power box inside, and he turns the lights on for the maze. So those lights come on. Danny runs out into the maze. Jack follows, way behind because he's still limping. And now we get a couple shots of, or steady cam shots of Danny running through the maze and Jack following. Cut back into the hotel with Wendy. She comes across Dick's body. She's freaked out by that. Turns around, goes the other way, runs into like a butler or waiter or something, dressed in the tuxedo with a, split head, like literally a split head with like blood coming down, and he like cheerses her and says, "Great party, isn't it?" And then, she screams, runs the other way, comes into a room with like, goes into the lobby, and there's like just a bunch of like skeletons and cobwebs, which is, one of the weaker scares, I guess. But, whatever. I think it's cool. Then, cut back into the maze. Danny's running through the snow and then stops, realizes that he's making footprints in the snow, and is like, has the genius idea to backtrack his footprints. And so he like walks backwards through like the footprints he already made, and then jumps off to the side after he gets back like a few, and hides behind a hedge, but then like covers those tracks. So that way the footprints just go to a certain position and then stop, and then there's no more footprints. Cut back to Wendy. She comes around a corner, and then we see the iconic blood flood of all the blood pouring out of the elevator and everything. That freaks her out. Cut back into the maze, and we see Jack come to the end of the tracks, and he's like looking around, and he's like, "Daddy," and he's all confused and everything, and just kind of just picks a direction and just keeps going, and then once Danny's like, behind the other hedge, like listening, and, he's all freaked out. Once the coast is clear, gets back out of the, from his hiding spot and follows his own tracks backwards out of the maze. So genius, like absolutely genius. I don't think I would have been that smart as a kid, but luckily my dad never went crazy and tried to kill, me and my family at a hotel. So like I said, he follows his tracks out of the maze, gets out of there. Wendy is outside. She sees him coming out of the maze. She's like She's like, Danny, and like throws the knife down into the snow, which I think she should have held on to it, because who knows at this point. And but they're reunited. They hug, they embrace, they get in the snowcat. We see Jack inside the maze, like still looking for Danny, still yelling like Danny. But we could hear from his voice that he's getting more and more tired and exhausted and running out of steam. We hear the snowcat power up, and so does he. And then now he's like freaking out, like Daddy, And now it's like it's not even like clear what he's saying at this point. Now he's just like screaming, like And when we see the snowcat pull away, and we see him like kind of struggle a little bit to get out of the maze, and then hard cut to Jack Torrance's dead frozen body sitting in the snow. And then the music comes back in, like the big band 1920s music, and we're getting just this like very slow zoom down the hallway at this like group of pictures on the wall in the hotel. And finally get to this one, and it says 4th of July ball, Overlook Hotel, July 4th, 1921. And we slow zoom into that picture, and then right front and center in this big group of 1920s partygoers is Jack Torrance, right there in the middle. And there we go. Like that's the shot we end on, is Jack, you've always been here, is what Grady said to him. So there we go. That's the end of the movie. Yeah. Great movie. I love it so much. I mean, a lot of it is just like weird supernatural stuff of like, you kind of just, if you try to put logic to it, and it's just, you're going to hurt your brain. I think you could just accept that there is always this, maybe it's like the same soul, like moving from person to person, you know what I mean? And then like because maybe when Grady killed his family, it was his picture on the wall in there, or, so is it the same entity, different body, or is it just always change, or has it just always been that? Like, that was just his destiny to go to that hotel, try to kill his family, fail, and be a picture on the wall, But in the end, it doesn't really matter, Lincoln Park. I think it's just a good movie. I think good movies challenge your understanding. They don't have to have all the answers. I think I prefer when there are things unanswered. I think a lot of my favorite movies leave a lot of stuff unanswered. Now, not everything, sometimes it is nice to just get like a closure on something. And I think this movie does have closure. It's just not answering every single mystery, It leaves a lot of unanswered questions, and you don't have to have an answer to everything. But yeah, it's just so mesmerizing. And I know that there was like a different alternate ending. Not even an alternate ending. Like the original ending was only shown in theaters for, I think, 2 weeks. And it was, so we see, Jack frozen, cut to a hospital where Mr. Ullman is there and visiting with Wendy and Danny, just like making sure they're okay and everything like that. You get some exposition about that Jack's body was never found and stuff like that. And Ullman hands Danny the tennis ball, the one that Jack was throwing around and everything. So it is just like one of those mystery things of like, oh, like, did Ullman know? Is he part of it? One of those things. It's just like this can of worms that ultimately Stanley Kubrick felt was unnecessary and cut it out and destroyed, I think, most of the prints. But obviously some have to exist, because I have seen like at least screen grabs of one of these pieces or one of these scenes. So it it exists somewhere, just not available to us. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think it. I think the ending works the way it does. I mean, would that have been a cool ending? Yeah, don't think I'd have a problem with it, and I don't have a problem with the way it ends now. I love this movie so much, and I hope you guys do too. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, watch, listen, all those things. Tell your friends, tell your family. Stick around for the other two snow movies this month, and stick around for whatever else I cook up for the rest of the year. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys have a good week. Thanks. Bye.